today's our guest, Professor P. And my dear participants, you know that there are 9 departments under the School of Social Sciences of the university. Each department is offering a program under the school. Already the school has conducted 3 programs, either in the form of webinar or a special talk. Today, the Department of History is organizing a webinar on writing histories of experience. The lecture on this topic will be given by Dr. P. Sanal Mohan, who is professor associated with the School of Social Sciences of MG University, a well-known professor, historian. I have known him for the last 10 years. He is a regular visitor of the Department of History of University of Kerala. On behalf of all present online and offline, I welcome Professor P. Sanal Mohan to this program.
Thank you very much, Professor Prasad. Yeah.
Professor and Head of the Department, Dr. Satish, is here. He is a vibrant professor and head. He is in the helm for the last 5 years at the department. Actually, he has taken initiatives to organize this program along with other faculty members of the department, including Dr. Jinimon. Professor Satish, you are also welcome to this program. Then faculty members are here. Dr. Sajina, Dr. Jinimon, research scholars, MA and MPhil students, on behalf of the department as well as University of Kerala, I welcome all of you to this program. So let me take my duty in inviting Professor Sanal Mohan. Dr. Sanal Mohan, you are invited to deliver the talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm very glad to be here this morning. I thank Dr. Prasad, who is directing the School of Social Sciences of University of Kerala, and also my former colleague and friend, Professor V. Satish, who is the head of the Department of History. And I thank both of them for this invitation. I also thank other members of the department, Dr. Jinimon, Dr. Sajana, and all these people I have come to know more intimately last few years when I was working with KCHR, and as Professor Prasad himself said, I have been a frequent visitor to the Department of History. So thank you very much indeed, and also to the students, researchers, MPhil students and postgraduate students who are here to listen to me this morning. So thanks once again. When Professor Satish asked me to give a talk, so I asked him what sort of theme will be good. So he suggested me that something which students of history would be interested in. So I thought, okay, so I will begin with certain things which I started some time back. So that's the time when I started my PhD level work, and subsequently when I reworked that for publication, and then obviously I continued to work in that particular area for a very long time. So I thought I shall share some of these research concerns and ideas that in certain ways influenced my work the last few years. So I titled the talk as Writing Histories of Experience. Writing Histories of Experience. That's how I have titled the talk. And this engagement with experience was actually necessitated by the kind of histories that I was familiar with, or the kind of histories with which I thought I had some kind of problems, and I thought it is quite important for anybody to have kind of critical engagement with, the kind of histories that are existing today. And it is in this context that I thought maybe one could to think about, the human experiences as we write about history. And now this is actually, I myself is uh, taken for the task because it is not a very easy topic to deal with. Although I try to reflect on this for some time, and I every time when I revisit the things which I myself wrote, and I find that the questions remain as very very challenging. Professor Satish, am I audible? Can you
Yes.
hear me well? Yeah, thank you very much. So this morning also I find the same kind of difficulties because this is such a difficult area. Now, as I'm speaking predominantly to a group of historians, I know that people are familiar with some of those historiographical arguments. One of which is that history, for that matter, whatever history that we are dealing with, we are writing about, and we read, so all these histories are in many ways part of some kind of foundationalist ideas. This is the first point I want to say. I mean, this is something which has been already there in these debates, which were opened up by famous historians like Joanne Scott. So she has a very important article, which way back in 1991, published in the journal Critical Inquiry, which was titled as "The Evidence of Experience." This is the Joanne Scott's article I'm referring to, 1991 article, where she actually opened up this question. And now remember, this particular scholar published a great deal of works, in the area of feminist history and so on. So, therefore, what I want to say is that alongside these foundationalist arguments, which are there very central for history, feminist historians and also those who have been writing the histories of race, especially political historians who try to look at the issues of race from the North American experience or from the Afro-Caribbean experience, or those who have been writing about the histories of African Americans and so on. So where you have the questions of race, economy, etc., coming in a very complex manner, issues of consciousness along with them, along with those issues. Such engagements with critical thinking within history have been actually challenging many of the foundationalist narratives of historians. Now, let me go back to what are these foundationalist arguments of historians before we move on to, introducing this idea of histories of experience. Now, probably we would take a few examples right from here in Kerala's context. Now, we are all familiar, for example, with the 19th and 20th century history of Kerala. as we in the Department of History is often referred to as modern history of Kerala, modern history. And so when we deal with modern history of Kerala, obviously we all know that we do a great deal of reading of the coming of the British, the establishment of British power in Malabar, or how Travancore and Cochin came under British paramountcy. So these are themes that we all know. So when we talk about this, that sort of histories, there are some assumptions that we as students of history share. As even as we are researchers or teachers of history, ultimately we would say that we are all students of history. So we assume that there is something like colonialism. These are, assumptions not without substance. There are a lot of substances in when we say that colonialism was there. But the histories of 19th and 20th centuries cannot be studied without assuming that British colonialism was there. But if you want to uh, go a little bit backward in time, if you want to write about 16th or 17th century Kerala, uh, obviously we need to think about the Portuguese Dutch colonialism, and also how the native state formations, state forms evolved, existed, flourished, and declined. So therefore, what I want to suggest is that whether we are talking about 16th or 17th century Kerala or 18th and 19th century, including 20th century. So for all these 4 5 centuries, we definitely had some foundational ideas around which history is organized. So that's what we actually discuss in historiography. The kind of assumptions, the presumptions, propositions, ideas with which history as an intellectual domain of inquiry is constituted. And that actually happens based on some kind of foundationalist ideas. So there could be a foundationalist ideas of colonialism, and one could also think about how colonialism transformed the native societies, how the sort of modernization began to take place, particularly during the British period. So we have some kind of ideas about what modernization is all about. Was it something that has happened in the economy? Was it something that has happened in the domain of ideas? Was it something that has happened in the domain of institution making, the new administrative institutions? So one could also say that all of them put together, when we bring together all of these in a disparate ideas, practices, etc., we could definitely call this conglomerate of ideas as something which qualifies to be referred to as modernization, the process of modernization. And then, as students of history, we understand that this is a very foundationalist idea, around which, the histories of 18th, 19th, and 20th century Kerala could be thought about. So that is why I'm saying that whichever part of the world that we are, as students of history, study about any part of the world, because in modern, since I'm sure that in the Department of History at the University of Kerala, you have a specialized sort of courses in modern history, which might take you to any part of the world. Yeah, so you can study the history of any region of the world, any continent. So we these days people talk a great deal about connected histories, global histories, and so on. So therefore, all these histories are really organized around this intellectual engagement initiated by the discipline of history, is organized around some of these foundational concepts and ideas. Okay, so I hope this is clear. I gave the example of colonialism, modernization, and things of that kind. Or let us say, some kind of ideas about human rights around which modern politics could be organized. If not organized, modern politics could be thought about, or modern politics could be critiqued. So, therefore, any such ideas around which a knowledge domain could be created, thought about, discussed, and critiqued could be identified as foundationalist ideas. So, I hope this is clear. Now, as students of and researchers in history, we could think about what are the ways in which we can offer a critique of these foundationalist ideas. So, these foundationalist ideas would suggest that whatever you are dealing with, whatever one researcher is dealing with, often enough, he or she will have to revisit those foundationalist ideas so that whatever verifications, whatever things we do as new, will have to be in certain ways verified in the light of the arguments, in the light of the researchers, in the light of the ideas that have been really created in the context of the earlier foundationalist ideas. So that's how people would say this historical knowledge proceeds to develop, etc. So please think about, especially the younger researchers. I invite them to think about this. Now, when you introduce a concept like experience, what it helps us to do is open up certain issues which might appear as resolved if you go by the foundationalist ideas. So that is what I wanted to say. See, when you, I mean, it is not just experience. You can bring in a number of similar issues. Probably, I'm sure that in this group of students who are listening to me, there might be people who are doing some very interesting projects for their PhD. So you just bring in those ideas in your mind and think about, think through those ideas in the light of what I am saying. So my next submission, after I have just mentioned what is our foundationalist idea, I'm saying that probably when you bring in the ideas of experience, actually what we are doing is we really start a critique of many of the foundationalist ideas, foundational assumptions with which history has been written. This is my next point. So I wish probably we can revisit that. Now, what is this? The whole engagement with experience. Now, as I said, because I could have taken a lot of examples from elsewhere, but I thought the Kerala example will be much more familiar to you. Now, people talk a great deal about modernization. So, what does it mean when you revisit the 19th and 20th century history of Kerala with an idea of experience, with the idea of experience? So, for example, so I still remember attending some of those pre-submission seminars the last maybe one and a half years uh, time in the Department of History. People have been doing very interesting kind of research, and what I want to say, so I still remember people writing about, issues of women, issues of the marginalized social groups, and so on. Broadly talking about how societies have been transformed in the modern way. So this is, you can think about some of the, pre-submission seminars that you have really attended. Now, when you bring in this idea of experience, to, for example, the ways in which in the modern period the women's position have transformed in Travancore society. If we bring in the idea of experience, it would mean we want to actually break open the category of women. See, we assume that there was something like a unified, category of women. But if we bring in the idea of experience, what would appear is that you need to have very substantial understanding of the complexities involved in the ways in which the identity of woman itself is created. Sorry, the identity of women itself is created. There you have to talk about whether one has got enough information or not. One has to talk about, for example, Adivasi women, or one has to talk about, the aspiring, the developing middle class women drawn largely from the upper caste communities in Travancore. Likewise, one has to talk about Dalit women in Travancore. So, what I want to say is that if you bring in the idea of experience, then naturally we are inclined to talk about differences of experiences across social groups. So, therefore, the earlier unity of an identity of women, which was actually created through the intellectual practices and discourses of modernization, would appear as breaking apart. So, this is a point I wanted to say. Now, when you bring in the experiences of women, then you soon realize that there are multiple experiences. Even as we talk about women as a unified category, many people have been doing that. But soon we realize that those experiences have been different. That difference actually comes out, depending on their social locations. If you want to talk about an agricultural laboring woman, or a woman from working class, in fact, there are a lot of studies of that kind. So if you want to talk about the working class of Koilon, so you have this Anna Lindbergh who has studied a long back the history and political economy, sociology, etc. of women working in cashew industry in Koilon. Maybe there are some students in our own group in the Department of History or there in the University of Kerala doing similar studies. Then can we really think about a unified working class woman? This is what I want to ask. You have on the one hand agricultural laboring women. On the other hand, you do have, women as usually in Kerala referred to as traditional sector, which I think as an economist, Professor Prasad might, disagree because those industries were not there for a long time. These are new industries, but our normal parlance, actually we refer to cashew and other things as traditional industries of Kerala. Anyway, that's a different matter altogether. What I want to draw your attention to is the fact that so when you bring in the idea of experience, you find differences in the experiences of working class women in agriculture sector, and the women who are in, say, for example, in the cashew processing industry. And similar differences could be seen if you want to stay focused on, for instance, the experiences of women in the weaving industry. Although probably in the south of Kerala we may not have so much of weaving, but of course in the bordering Tamil region we do have, Balramapuram and those places which are historically known for. I mean, it was part of the old Travancore. So we do have a substantial history of that. But then remember the fact that that was a caste-bound profession. I mean, an occupation which was traditionally, managed in the caste form. Because that is true for most jobs in India until very recently, because the skill transfer used to take place within the families. The reproduction of not just the physical, biological reproduction, but the reproduction of skills also used to take place within the families. And if you bring in similar examples, then you soon realize that the experiences of these women, the working class women, whose sides of labor had been so diverse and different, and there the experiences would also be different, right? And now we can take another example. So look at the labor processes in agricultural sector. There are a lot of people who have written about it, and then we see that women who were in the sect of rice planting, or otherwise paddy farming. So you see the kind of labor process, whether you're talking about Kutanad or Palghat or any rice growing region of Kerala, you find that, or maybe the rice growing region all across India or all across Asia, you find large numbers of women were involved in the process. And people have been writing about this. So, therefore, when you bring in this, and specifically focused on these differences, then you find that even as we usually think about a unified category of women, then in these examples, as I've shown, when you bring in the question of experience, it becomes really complex. So therefore, there may be certain paradigms of explanation based on the histories of the working class that we are familiar with. But the moment you bring in these dimensions of caste and other kinds of things, or the everyday experiences of women, then you find that we are entering into a complex narrative. We are actually invited to look at the complexities of the situation, and this will unsettle, as I said in the beginning, some of the foundationalist ideas with which we have been writing history. And I hope this point is clear. Now, I move to some other issues which are actually connected with our understanding of what experience is all about. So I said in the beginning I just mentioned that I reached this area of research in the course of my own inquiries into the histories of slavery in our part of Kerala. I mean, in Kerala. So that's where I began with. And then that took me to reading what is the whole question of experience that we have of slavery in the archive. This is the question which actually militated in my mind. So therefore, when I went to the uh, archive of various sorts of archive, my idea was to look at how could I read these historical sources so that you know they do really come up with some kind of interesting ideas about the ways in which, as a researcher, I'll be in a position to talk about experience. So this was one of my, concerns. Now, yeah. Now, what I want to suggest in the remaining time is that when you bring in this idea of experience, then what will happen? We have to look at, questions of the everyday. In fact, if we actually read, as in fact, I just mentioned in the beginning the article which John Scott wrote long back, the evidence of experience. In a subsequent section of the paper, which I've been, referring to, the author actually deals with. She actually refers to the need for looking at the everyday. Now, what are we familiar with? In the discourse of history, as students of history, we are actually dealing with, as I said, the greater things. Economies, societies, polities, and also mega categories like colonialism, imperialism, and how they transformed colonized society. So there are, in today's parlance, we would say the grand narratives with which social and economic transformation have been talked about. Now, within this transformation, we are actually trying to figure out how experiences of the people have changed. Now, for instance, if you want to look at, so these are some of the issues which I wish to open up, and I'm sure that in your own reading you can come up with very interesting kind of understanding of this, or you can really explore it further. Now, in the course of say, colonial expansion, I just give another example. So we read about the colonization of the non-European society, and how did people understand this? How did those who were colonized by an external power, by the Europeans, how did they understand this? Now, for a very long time, especially in the 20th century, in the context of anti-colonial struggles, national liberation movements, people have been talking about, the kind of uh, uh, mostly in terms of binaries like the colonized and the colonizer. There are a lot of debates of that kind. I mean, broadly talking about what sort of experiences that colonialism brought in. And we do have a lot of national histories, critical histories, etc., dealing with this. Now, what the experiential aspect of historiography, or from the point of view of understanding experience, what we want to problematize here is the possibility of looking at colonialism from a very different perspective in terms of how it transformed the lives of people. Now, this is a point, it's a very contentious issue that I'm saying. People can disagree with me, in a very big way. And sometimes it's not, now it is safe to speak because I'm far away. But if in a closed group, it can also have a very bad consequences. So what I'm saying is just this. For a very long time, especially in the context of anti-colonial histories, which has come out of histories that have come out of anti-colonial mobilizations, people had a very different idea about what colonialism did really do. What was the effect of colonialism? And we know that it is often referred to in the negative, you incapacitating large swathes of population in many parts of the world, incapacitating people, destroying their livelihood, or you have read about the histories of primitive accumulation, about political economists, or the people who were writing from the political left about the histories of colonialism have been talking about. So that is one dimension of that. What is the other side of it? The other side of it is in settler colonies, or even in non-settler colonies. With the coming of the Europeans, you find life being transformed in a very substantial way. To the extent, some of those Latin Americans would say that Latin Americans are Europeans in exile, because these are the descendants of the Spaniards, the Spaniards, the conquerors, the conquistadors, and so on. And many in Latin America, they look exactly like the Europeans. So therefore, they would say that the Latin Americans are Europeans in exile. So these are kind of interesting statements people make. So therefore, what I want to suggest is, from the side of the colonized people, when we look, we find these narratives becoming thicker and thicker, in the sense that each area will have its own histories. Yeah, but we do have national narratives. But within that national narratives, different regions will have different kinds of histories. Histories of transformation could be there. I'm not minimizing the effect of colonial exploitation. Exploitation definitely was there. But at the same time, we do find many other areas in which lives have been transformed in the colonized societies. And therefore, when we want to capture, the sort of experiences of people, so then probably we need to bring in this complexity back into the discourses, back into our analysis, back into our critical reflection. So there you find sometimes, the religion of the colonizer transforming the perceptions of the people, whether one likes it or not. So this sort of things have happened in a big way in colonized society. So therefore, when you want to talk about experience, I don't have a final answer to this, but I wish to open up this in a different way. to see how people have been talking about the experiences of colonial transformation. And then for a very long time, this was done in a binary manner. The colonizer colonized. I mean, there is a great deal of significance for that particular political position, especially in the context of national liberation struggles. There is no doubt about that. But what I'm just signposting now is to look at the need for problematizing that binary to see how people have been transformed. And I'm not saying that all of those transformations were good or all of those transformations were bad. Actually, I'm not, saying that particular thing. I'm not bringing in at the moment a value judgment regarding whether it was good or bad. But instead of that, what we are looking at is from the experiential dimension, we want to see how things were transformed. Now, in colonial societies, it's very, basic, general knowledge to most of us that in colonized societies we find transformation of languages, new languages coming in, and new ways of everyday life coming in. So there were many ways in which the lives of people have been transformed in an absolutely fundamental manner. So now the question is, what about those experiences? This is what I'm saying. Rather than bringing in this question of whether this was good or bad, let's just ask from another side, another angle. What would it mean to talk about such experience? Now, this is a highly far-fetched kind of argument I'm making. I know about it, but I'm just inviting, especially the younger, a lot of researchers, to think about it. Now, having said this, we need to think about the experiences of people. That's where this historiography becomes actually, much more challenging than the example of colonialism which I gave now. Especially when you want to talk about the experiences of the, let us say, the oppressed sections of society. And now, the experience as an idea, when you want to write a history from that perspective, that need not be confined to the experiences of the oppressed alone. You can also write about the experiences of the, say, the lords in the manner, how they lived. I mean, the life of the privileged sections, the lives of the middle classes, the lives of the rural gentry. There are a lot of histories of that kind. If you look at the new books that have been published by leading international publishers, especially for medieval European history and so on. And I found that there are a lot of writings on the everyday life of all sections of society. The priestly classes, the feudal nobles, or the church fathers, especially about the lives of the Catholic, within the Catholic Church hierarchy. There are a lot of interesting histories of that kind, and therefore, what I want to say is that the idea of experience doesn't get limited to one part of society alone. We are not just talking about the experiences of the the subaltern classes or the oppressed classes alone. One could also talk about other kinds of experience. For instance, when there are a lot of writings on everyday life, for example, I mean the private life. And we do have historians in India like Sudipta Kaviraj, who has written about the history of private life in Bengal. So it is actually about the private life of the well-to-do sections of Calcutta and other cities of Bengal in the colonial times. And we do have historians, European historians, who have written extensively on private life. So the idea of private life actually brings in the experiences of men, women, children, everybody who lived in a situation where the whole idea of family as a private space became established. Now, this one could say is an example of an experiential history, right? So it is not just about the oppressed. It is not just about the working class men and women. So you can write about any segment of society as much as the archive, the evidence allow. You can do that. Now, I think how many minutes are left? 10 more minutes, because it is 11:50 now. Dr. Satish, I think you have to unmute yourself. Please unmute. Yeah, thank you. Please
Yeah,
continue.
Professor Sanji,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
have more minutes in between 10 and 20. If you,
Okay. Yeah. So I will. Yes. Okay. It is 11:51 now. Yes.
okay.
So I will be brief and I will just cut short. So what I wanted to open up this, I mean, actually, I'm not closing up because I'm sure that there are very interesting young minds listening to me, and I look forward to people, engaging in this kinds of research. So therefore, what I want to say is that the idea of experience, as it is shown by historians through their researches, is that possibly we can think about the experiences of almost all sections of society, no matter which I mean, no matter we are just dealing with, or no matter we should deal in a single-minded manner with the lives and conditions of the working class or underprivileged. We can talk about everybody else, or all segments of society. But the other interesting aspect is that, as we are familiar with the existing historiography, there is a great deal of writing on the privileged section. There is a great deal of writings about the royal classes, which is true for most histories of the world, whether it is in India or elsewhere. So, therefore, in the historiography, where specifically when we talk about experience, we are talking about the experience of women, the experience of the working classes, the experiences of the enslaved people, the experiences of the underprivileged. So this is the other dimension of that, because such histories have been discarded for a long time. Such histories have been marginalized for a long time. There is a greater need for, there is a greater awareness for within historiography. I mean, that is also part of the politics of knowledge production. People have been talking a great deal about the experiences of the underprivileged sections, and therefore, uh, going back to some of the writings I have mentioned in the course of my lecture, in the course of my talk, like that of John Scott. I want to signpost a few things, a few more things. One central question here is, and I think whatever I have mentioned as of now is clear to you, and I'm sure that we have a session for discussion. So it is not that all of us do not have experience. See, every human being, yeah, whether a man or a woman or a child, will definitely have experiences. We all have experience, but the point is that not all of us talk about those experiences, isn't it? So even as we could think about our own experiences now, even as I continue to speak, and are there occasions when we actually, share these experiences with the others, or the situation could be such that we may not have many occasions where we really, exchange our experiences, or we explain our experiences to others, or experiences have to wait for the right moment. Now, if somebody is, talking about his own or her own experience, then what happens is that this is the argument which is presented by Joan Scott. She says that that particular individual or group of individuals, they enter into a different kind of subjectivity, a different kind of understanding of themselves, a different kind of agential position. Agential position in the sense that they are able to mobilize their imagination, their ideas, their situatedness in society for transforming their life. That's when agential action takes place. So therefore, when if a particular person is able to articulate his or her ideas in such a way that uh, those articulations are capable of shedding light on the shedding light on the past, or it is able to shine light on what has happened at some point of time, then it would mean that this person, unlike many of his compatriots, unlike many of his comrades, unlike many of his own people or her own people, this person has acquired a critical subjective position that allows her or him to talk about these groups' experience differently. So therefore, it is not enough. So we can discuss this. It is not enough to have experiences. It is not that everyone does not have experience. Each and every person has this particular experience. But the fundamental question is how far we are able to really talk about it in a critical way, recall those experiences, and refine or redefine our own understanding of the past. So this is the complex situation involved there. And therefore, when I did my field work, so I did a little bit of ethnographic field work in communities where these ideas of caste slavery existed. And now, when we listen to the narratives of people when they recall the experiences of slavery, what will happen is that, which I have explained in my book in a detailed manner, just I recall here, what happens is that they are recreating a certain kind of historical past. And in that particular reconstruction of the historical past, what a critical historian would be interested in is to see how they imagine a certain kind of past. So please remember that this imagination of the past is not completely devoid of, the what you call the, you know, the substantial presence of the historical facts of slavery. Because I know that in a classroom of historians, when you give a lecture to your students who are being trained in history, we always tell them that you look for facts, you look for evidences and so on. Now, when you bring in experience as evidence, we are not saying that, or as a researcher, I'm not telling that one needs to go beyond this evidentiary paradigm. Because what will happen is that this is the foundationalist problem that I began with. You see, because in history, when as students and researchers in history, when we try to say something, often enough the question of evidence come in. Now, how far we can go beyond that? So the evidences are to be there. Now the question is, can we take this experience as evidence? This is the central question there. So therefore, what will happen? We are placing one leg into that domain of that foundationalist position in history writing, and then trying to step out of that, step out into the domain of experience, where again we need to have this tight rope walking kind of experience. Sorry, the experiment. So therefore, experience would be there. Yeah. So the foundationalist question of evidence is there. Now, when somebody is talking about the experience of oppression, sufferings, and so on, it is not just from the personal experience that this person talks about. he actually, have been or she actually has been thinking about. He has been or she has been thinking about this for a very long time. And then you will soon realize that there was a new and different subject position from within which this person is able to reflect on the past. So I did some kind of field work, which I'm sure many of you listening to me must have done similar field work elsewhere. Whether you're working on working class history or any sort of history, think about how people recall their past and how they talk about their past experiences. Now, these are rooted in some kind of, I mean, if not tangible, some kind of, experiences for which you can suggest some evidences, some archival materials or some, sort of, recorded events or recorded, sort of instances. You might be able to give that. But in the course of thinking about this, in the course of thinking about the experience of the past, people reach a different position. And that positioning or that particular context of reaching a particular position enables them to create knowledge on that. And therefore, when somebody talks about a very bad experience of the past and reflect on that, and then that person, unlike many other compatriots, would be in a position to create knowledge on this. Now, if I invite your attention to a lot of writings that have appeared in the 1990s on the partition violence. So you have a lot of feminist scholars, many others, subaltern scholars who wrote on, the partition violence and how people suffered that. So if you revisit that historiography, so you have people like Urvashi Bhutalia, who has written about it, and you have Gyanendra Pandey's writings, Gyan Pandey's writings on, books like Routine Violence and other writings on the partition, and Shail Mayaram's writings on the Mio communities of Rajasthan. So these are some of the books that come to my mind immediately. So what I want to suggest is that if you read these histories, then you will soon realize that anybody who reads these histories will realize that the people, when they recollect the partition violence in the 1947, they do give a very substantial kind of new narrative, and these are in certain ways factual, but these have been experienced by people. Now, when women talk about the violence that they have endured, then soon we realize that the women's body becomes a site of contest for nationalism, both for the Muslims and Hindus, and of course the Sikhs included in it. So that is how the history of partition has been handed down to us, and the position of women and the body of women, became very, very substantially contested to the extent that we read the histories of thousands of missing women from both sides of the border. How does one talk about this particular experience? So I'm just opening up this. Similar, as much as I could talk about the experience of slavery or other forms of sufferings that one can think about. So my point is that these experiences, when someone recalls, actually transforms the person who recalls into a different human being altogether in his or her subject position. And therefore, they might be able to narrate a great deal about experiences, different from different from many others in the same group, with the same social group, that have experienced the same thing. So, how are we going to, understand this? This is the other problem that the question of experience actually opens up. And therefore, what I want to suggest is that it is true that not everyone will talk about experience. Only those who have been transformed by those experiences into a new subject position will talk about it. Now, I think it is very true even in contemporary times. You look at the farmers' agitation now going on, and we have been reading in all the the newspapers and other online platforms, how people have been talking about it. Yeah. So, what happens to the people who are within the barbed wires, whose movements have been really curtailed? And how can we talk about that experience of being open to the elements? They have been facing this inclement weather, very cold climes of North India, Delhi and other suburbs, where they have been camping for such a long time. And what about this experience? And can we write a history of that? It is less than how many days now? 90 days perhaps, or little closer. It is inching towards 100 days. And if, as students of history, we want to write a history of this agitation, and I'm sure that we will be, engaging with, the experience of being faced with the state violence. The state would claim that the state is yet to unleash violence on them, but we know that there were several moments when the people have been facing violence, or nearly 200 deaths have been reported, isn't it? Due to various conditions of existence there, people have been dying, or the experience of sharing food. People have been cooking food and sharing. And we also have seen the televised images or the printed images of people in tents, uh, staying on in the cold nights. So there are a lot of things that we have to think about, and the kind of solidarity across the divides. So therefore, if the last less than 100 days history of the farmers' movement, if we are trying to write, which is quite legitimate a theme to write about, then we need to bring in this experience of pain, sufferings, and also the uncertainties out there, and many other things. The questions of mobilization and the need for their voice to be heard, and also there are a lot of things that one can, as a student of history, think about this. So therefore I want to submit this thing, that experience remain as a very valid category of historical analysis. And in fact, my last point, since it is 12:07, my last point is, even as we read the archival materials, let us read the archival materials with an idea that we are looking at the experience of people in it. So therefore, it is not just a bundle of papers in the state archives that we are dealing with. So and when we open this, we find a lot of historical, the real human beings, the stories of them coming out of this. But definitely not all archival materials will say that, because if you are looking at a great deal of government papers, of various departments, sometimes you may not get a very captivating narrative of the experience of people over there. But if you look at some other archive, uh, you know, pertinent to this particular point is the Missionary Archives, with which I have some familiarity doing this sort of research. You find the real life and blood human beings rising from the recorded, the records kept in the archive. These are, kept in chests, where temperature is controlled, where paper is quite well preserved. As you touch very cold papers, because they come out of something like freezers. These libraries itself a big freezer, and they pull out the chest, and the archival materials come to you as very cold one. But when you open this, sometimes you find that the Chana woman come out of that. So if you are reading something related to 19th century breast cloth agitation, which I have read a lot, you find the life and blood human beings coming out of this narrative. And then, as a researcher, with this idea of experience, and I'm sure that you can really call this person to come, this gentleman or this lady to come out of the document and speak to you. So therefore, I think I want to signpost the significance of experience as a very important category in writing critical histories. And for want of time, I stop here. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Professor Satish and Professor Prasad. And I'm glad that we all survived this difficult time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sanal Mohan, for a very nice presentation, and I think that it is highly interesting and thought-provoking. I think that there are students who are very eager of asking questions and clearing their own doubts. So, can we have a 10 minutes discussion on your arguments?
Yeah,
And
my pleasure. I'll be happy to sit. Yeah.
okay, so all participants, I think comprise PG students, MPhil students, and research scholars, as well as teachers of the department and sister department. So, dear participants, if you have doubts for clearing, you can ask, or you can put your questions in the chat box. Dr. Sanal, can you share the chat box?
Yeah. Either way, if you could read it out for me, or I can look at the chat box. Let me see. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the society has been confronting with conflicting interest.
Yeah.
To what extent writing experiences in the domain of history
Okay.
in consideration with the infirmities
In can you repeat it?
confronting with the infirmities or shortcomings
Okay.
in the reconstruction of history. On the one side, that is, for example, that is the students of history are bound to rely on primary evidences.
Yeah.
To what actions the objective standards could be resorted to.
Yeah.
While,
Okay.
while writing the experience of the marginalized or the less fortunate segments,
Yeah.
the mainstream of history. Thank you.
Okay. So this is a difficult question. Thank you for that. So I will try my best to respond to that. Now, I think the last part of your question is, I think, the most significant part, actually. Uh, where you have this primacy of evidence, isn't it? And also the evidence when it comes to experience, and then the kind of objective standards, which is what one of the foundationalist arguments of historians. Now, we need to think about objectivity, the ways in which probably the reflexive sociologists do. The historiography, as of now, I guess as teachers of history, we know that there was a time when there used to be a lot of discussions on the question of objectivity, but I think which is discussed a little bit differently now. For example, no uh, source is a neutral source. Now, the kind of materials that we read in the archive, or the sort of evidences that we call out for writing history from any source, for example, whether it is an inscription, which mostly ancient and medieval historians use, whether it is such an inscription or a newspaper report that modern historians use, or a government record, or commissions of inquiry reports, or there are a lot of that kind of writings, or the regular files of any of the government departments, whether it is general administration or health or education. So you name it, you have it. So you can bring in this huge compendium of archival materials which are there. So what I want to suggest is that none of them are, in certain ways, objective because they do cater to a certain kind of ideas with which governance used to take place. So therefore, from the side of the governance, as you look at, each of those files could have had a very specific function to perform. And now, therefore, all of them are products of certain kinds of knowledge, certain kinds of discourses. Now, if you read a file with regard to education, and let's say when there is a file which deals with grants in aid institutions, as you see a lot of them in the what you call this Travancore Administration report, yearly Travancore Administration report if you read. So for almost all departments there are this sort of things. Now all of them have a particular function of in certain ways, let us say, quote unquote, developing the Travancore economy, society, and so on. Now we know that this is not an absolutely uninterested kind of narrative. It has the interest of the state. It has had the interest of different social groups and so on. So therefore, let us say that when you try to determine the objective standards, these objective standards actually come out of the ways in which this particular kind of document or evidence that prop up with, we come out with, have been created, and they have been created in the process of a certain kind of rational bureaucratic practice, and that rational bureaucratic practice has come out of certain kind of presuppositions, assumptions, and so on. Now, as historians, we need to understand how this particular piece of what we propose as a piece of evidence was actually conceived and written about. And then we know that there is a whole range of problems of power, problems of discourse, knowledge production, etc., involved in what we call as an archival material. So the same thing will be there when you come to the narrative of an oppressed person. Even sometimes you find a narrative of an oppressed person in the archive itself. Even how was that particular piece of narrative produced is a question that we need to encounter. Now, if you think that, for example, if you see a situation of something deposed in a court of law, so why was that statement made in a court of law, or some kind of statements which the law enforcing agencies, the police, etc., might call out, might get from a person who is accused. So was it, was that statement obtained out of duress? Sometimes, people are being put under duress, they are physically tortured to get these kinds of confessional statements. And when a historian uses it, he just shouldn't stop with the statement alone. He should also look at, this is what Carlo Ginzburg did in Seas and Bonds. He actually talked about the Miller's case. This is an example which I usually give in my classroom. Now, we are invited as students of history, as researchers in history, we are invited actually to look at the conditions in which these evidences have been created. So, therefore, a judicial department file where a certain thing is, and where you have a narrative about, a criminal act, for example. When you read the confessions made by the accused, we as researchers should be thinking about the conditions of production of that particular document, under what kind of conditions this person gave this witness or evidence or statement. So therefore, when we bring in that, the so-called objective dimension of that source become very porous. The boundaries of that become porous, and we know that that objective standard is actually falling apart. It doesn't hold very good at that point of critical engagement that a scholar, when he or she makes. So therefore, when the same thing applies to experience, but the dimension of experience becomes a bit different, because if you want to look at looking at the same judicial files, you can ask a question like, what was the experience of an accused person when he gave this evidence to a police officer? What sort of mental trauma that he had experienced? What kind of physical pain that he was made to endure? And out of that, this confession statement was made. And in fact, it happens even today. And unfortunately, it might be happening even as we are talking. Some policemen will be, getting some statement from a hapless man, caught for some good or bad reason. So this is happening even as we talk about it. It is happening now in Kerala. In many parts of Kerala, it is happening. So therefore, as when it comes to historian, her position will be always to look at how this has been created. So what is the experience of a person who has to undergo torture for that? Now, the other aspect of experience, whether you are talking about say the person who is oppressed, or a woman who is oppressed, a man who is violated, etc. There we have to look at the ways in which he himself narrates or she herself narrates their experience, and where the ways in which perhaps this person talks about pain. What are the kind of phrases, words, the metaphors, similes, etc. he or she uses in explaining this. So, by analyzing the language, by analyzing the emotional content of that, by exploring, all this emotional side of, experience, we can actually come to certain kind of conclusions about the veracity of that, the possibility of understanding the so-called. We are not absolutely looking for truth. We are not doing that. We are trying to approximate, what must have been the experience of this person. So there, I'm sure that this methodology has a potential. On the one hand, to destroy or undermine the old ideas and assumptions about the objectivity, and self-reflexively looking at how certain conditions made possible the creation of an archival material, and then explore this archival material critically to see how at some point of time a certain human experience is embedded in this material, and there we are not hamstrung by, we are not limited by some kind of ideas of objectivity. Objectivity depends on actually ultimately the knowledge which comes out of these processes and procedures, and if that knowledge stands the scrutiny of the peer group, the scholarly community, and I think that is where ultimately the objectivity question is resolved. I don't know if I have responded to it, but this is, I'm sure, an ongoing conversation. So thank you very much. Yeah.
So, any questions from Mrs. Scholars, PG students, MPhil scholars?
Yeah, I also don't see any questions in the chat box.
Jinima?
I see the names of people who are there, so that's also nice. Yeah.
So, shall we conclude, sir?
My pleasure, and if you think so as a chair,
I think that
I'll be happy.
Yeah.
So I invite to propose vote of thanks of studies.
Respected Professor Dr. A.K. Prasad, respected Professor Dr. Sanal Mohan, respected dignitaries who have come over here to indulge in this webinar, erudite scholars, students, ladies and gentlemen. We have witnessed a very good topic delivered by Dr. Sanal Mohan in the proposed webinar, which has been giving emphasis on writing histories of history. This is a novel topic in every respect. Dr. Sanal Mohan has been design service as professor in the School of Social Sciences, coming in the ambit of Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. He is an internationally renowned academician who has contributed enormously to the discipline of history by dint of his academic articulations. He has dealt with pertinent issues which have been confronting with the less fortunate segments of the society all over the world. He discussed the historical status of the people representing various sections, the haves and have-nots, in consideration with monetary aspects, the legal aspects, historical aspects, social aspects, and so on and so forth, have been given due consideration by the learned professor in the course of his lecture. Being the head of the Department of History, Honorable Director Mahatma, and on behalf of the School of Social Sciences, I extend thanks to Dr. Sanal Mohan for delivering the speech on this august function.
Thank you.
Dr. A.K. Prasad is a dynamic person as far as the University of Kerala is concerned. He has exposed his caliber in various ways by virtue of his service. He has adorned the post of head Department of Economics, University of Kerala. He adorned the post of Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences of the respective institution, and moreover, he has been working as the Director of School of Social Sciences of the pivotal institution, University of Kottayam. He is a learned friend of mine. We joined in this institution as lecturers in 1995. From that period onwards, I know him very well, and he is a studious academician who has contributed to the enrichment of the academic pursuits. On behalf of the Department of History, Mahatma and School of Social Sciences, I extend sincere thanks to Dr. A.K. Prasad. This august function is enriched with the invaluable presence of eminent personalities. academicians, especially Dr. Jinimon, Dr. Sajina, Dr. Grishmalata, Dr. Rajita, Dr. Divya, Dr. Anjana, Dr. Suresh, Dr. Shakila, and so on and so forth, representing various affiliated colleges. They have taken keen interest in attending the webinar. On behalf of the Department of History and on behalf of the School of Social Sciences, I extend sincere thanks to each and every one of the academicians in this respect. We are also enriched with the invaluable presence of the erudite scholars, academicians, students, social scientists, and so forth. On behalf of the Department of History and on behalf of Mahatma and School of Social Sciences, I extend sincere thanks to each and every one of you who have considered with the request of the Department of History pertaining to this sober function. Thank you very much.